Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. This is our second installment of a joint Urbanarium Small Housing BC event. We've changed the format from an active, robust debate to conviviality and problem solving, which is always good. And my name is Jake Fry, and thank you all for coming. I'd like to start off today's topic by actually going back to our last session. There was a question that was been raised that was been stuck with me for the last 3 or 4 weeks since we were all together last time. And it was a question raised by a young woman at the back and our Q&A at the end, asking about sort of colonialism in place. And her question wasn't answered properly, but it initially, immediately occurred to me what we had neglected to do, and something we all have to recognize, that we are on other people's land. We are on the land of the Musqueam, the Salish, and the Tsleil-Waututh people, and it's through their generosity and, in many respects, their pain that we are here, at least initially. And it starts tonight's discussions in a way around the topic of small, because for myself, somebody who really has believed in this type of housing and discussions around this, it comes to my mind that really what we're often talking about is land in place, and how we use land, and how we respect it, and how we build communities, and what's important to us in communities. And with that in mind, I often like to talk about or draw an example from a friend of mine or someone who's become a friend, and I think a very talented architect in the States, Ross Chapin. And he uses this lovely analogy of talking about what it's been like to be in North America, at least in the West Coast, for the last 10 decades, 12 decades. And he says we need to look, in some respects, and use a metaphor of the forest, which is that as we started our communities on other people's communities, we had raised those communities, much like we do in the forestry industry. We take out everything. And then we started to build. And when we build quickly. And we build much like a monocrop forest with trees that were of a type that would grow fast, that would serve a purpose, that would be convenient and utilitarian. But we're now at a cross-section, I think, across North America, and in our communities here, where we need to think about our cities and communities much more like what we hope to have in the forest, which is old-growth forest. A mature environment where things can coexist, different things rely on each other and weave back and forth, and so that we have a place that is rich and full and has a sense where many things can be at the same time. And when we think of small housing, in many respects, what we're talking about is our place here, that we do not need to have one type of housing, that we're able to use the land and use the community around us, both in the sense of amenity and as connectivity, and that we have a shared environment that people in different walks of life, different people with different interests, can have that interconnectivity, much like that old-growth forest. So with that, I'd like to start tonight's event. And I'd like to make a couple of just housekeeping notes that this is a presentation put on by the Urbanarium, which is a nonpartisan body that examines urban issues and has been wonderful over the last few years bringing these type of topics to the community. And Small Housing BC, which is a non-for-profit, which focuses on what we feel is a better use of residential lands across the province, utilizing smaller built forms as a solution for urban growth. And most importantly, I'd like to thank our partners, the School of Architecture at UBC, the Creative Morning, I don't have my reading glasses, sorry, and Rethink, both who are our partners in helping us actually put this event together. But most importantly, of course, any organization relies on its volunteers, and to our volunteers and board members, we have to extend a great hand of thanks because they've done a great job, I think, in bringing these ideas forward. So with this, I'll start tonight's moderator and a little bio of Michael Mortensen, who is, I'm very fond of. He's my guitar partner. We play hopefully once a week, or at least we try to. He brings 20 years of development and urban planning experience and currently owns Livable Cities, which is his company. And he is, see, this is what happens when you get over 56. He has worked, I know he's worked in the UK, in Vancouver, London, Toronto, and Edinburgh. He's a very dynamic planner, and he's worked both from a municipal level as well as from private practice. And I'd like to invite Michael up here to lead tonight's event. And thank you very much.
Jake, don't take my notes. Thank you very much, Jake. Thanks, everybody, for coming to tonight's talk on Is Small Beautiful? I wanted to give some design credit for the micro suite that's out front, the 300-square-foot micro suite that you saw taped onto the floor. I think I was a principal architect, and Richard Henriquez was my assisting architecture. Richard designed the bathroom and the kitchen, and we wanted to have some fun. And tonight's panel will be really fun because we're considering a really interesting question. As Vancouver grows and as all the pressures of affordability grow, this is a big question. Is small beautiful? Breaking rules for compact affordability. You can join the conversation on Twitter, hashtag Housing Talks, Twitter @Urbanarium, and also on Instagram. So Is Small Beautiful? It's a riff, of course, off of Edward Schumacher's famous book, Small is Beautiful, a study of economics as if people mattered. And this was the zeitgeist of the early 70s, limits to growth, expanding use of the world's resources and all these questions that it triggered in terms of sustainability. So I think, let's take a riff of that and say small is beautiful, housing as if people, the economy, and the environment mattered. So let's design and deliver compact homes to fit local economic, demographic, and economic needs. That's the thesis. And why? Well, we're changing, right? Our society is changing. Demographics are changing. We're shrinking. We've gone from 4.3 people per family in 1941 to 2.9 in 2016. Households, even smaller, 2.4 people per household in 2016. 28.2% of us live in one-person households, and there's 16% of us have lone parent households. We've become a sort of a slightly atomic society versus a molecular one. We're getting smaller. In 1950, 3.4 people lived in 983 square feet. This is sort of a North American stat, maybe not exclusively Canadian. But by 2010, 2.6 people on average lived in 2,392 square feet. Is small beautiful? For the last 50, 60 years, I think we've had a thesis that big is beautiful. That's changing, though, of course. The built environment, really, in terms of economy, sustainability, land use, affordability, it's the wrong configuration for society. We need more adaptable and sophisticated designs. We talked about this the last go-around when we looked at the suburbs. What are we going to do with our suburbs? The first shift was the Vancouver Special. Let's split a house in two, sneakily, and work around the rules, because you couldn't have two kitchens back then, right? But people bent the rules, and they got these Vancouver Specials approved. Do we need a new Vancouver Special, given the pressures on affordability and land? Do we carve that up some more? How do we slice up that cake in a way that's affordable to more people? My cat likes it. When small is not beautiful, do we need rules that really guide us and restrict us on how small we can build? When small is not beautiful, I have a game. This is an advertisement in a paper called, it was Living Large and Spaces for All, and it was advertising a junior 3-bedroom and den with 2 baths, 880 square feet. And I thought that was impressive, 880 square feet, 3 beds. What rules are they breaking? So I looked, I could find 2 bedrooms. Can you find the third? No, you can't. Because I called the agent. I said, where's the 3rd bedroom? He said, it's the solarium. So, this is following the rules. The status quo, we're putting babies in solariums. Not good practice. We can do better. What rules do we have to bend to fit 3 bedrooms into under 900 square feet? Because this is kind of what's happening, isn't it? This is when small isn't beautiful. Because that's uninsulated. That's a slow cooker. It's uninsulated, glazed-in space, right? You don't want to put your baby in a slow cooker. So I think this is a candidate for a new Georgie Award with a Pinocchio. So what rules do we have to bend? We need to think about space more flexibly and more creatively. We need to think about not just square feet, but square feet hours. So our panel is going to tell us about how they are bending some rules and design to deliver space that functions better, small spaces that function better. So IKEA, I love going to IKEA and seeing this 391 square foot apartment. There's a market need for this. Consumers are telling us they want this. This is in the marketplace. IKEA is prototyping a movable wall system. You can go to IKEA and buy a movable wall system. Why are we designing apartments with walls? Put your own in. We're not especially looking at new solutions, too. We should be thinking about old solutions. A Pattern Language by Christopher Alexander, famous book from the 1970s. And he talks about why we have fixated on one type of bedroom, when if you look culturally, the way people live around the world, there's dozens of different types of sleeping arrangements, like an alcove. This is one from Potsdam Palace in Berlin. Kings, queens, princes slept in an alcove. Quite lovely. This is Thomas Jefferson's bedroom, sandwiched in an alcove between two rooms. So if it's good enough for the President of the United States, if it's good enough for kings and queens and princes, why can't we have kind of creative bedrooms? Lots of creative examples of sleeping arrangements, different types of bedrooms. This is a train I used to take regularly to Edinburgh from London, and this is a junior bedroom that looks just like my train cabin. Personally, got interested in this, living downtown and with a family, two kids and a dog in a small 2-bedroom. Made it into the New York Times Christmas edition of 2005. This is the place I lived in. 2 bedrooms, didn't really work well. Busted open 1 bedroom, opened it up to the living room, put the kids in the big bedroom. So we started bending the space to meet needs. But tell you what, we bought that for $200,000 in 2004, a qualifying income of $65,000. By 2018, the price of that had almost tripled, and you need $114,000 of income to qualify. Lots of good examples of technology, different furniture that makes better use of space, movable wall systems, super cool techie things that allow people to rethink design and really flex the use of space. So, I think the industry needs to question its own conventions. In this typical 2-bedroom, 38% of the space is 8-hour space. You sleep in it. Why do we need a walk-in closet in every bedroom, in every apartment? Why? Because really, you could take that out and fit more living space in there and use it flexibly. Blow a wall out, make that 24-hour space. Basically, take your living space, make it 24-hour space, not 8-hour space. So I think the development industry needs to rethink its models, but I think the planning side of things also we also need to rethink our rules. Inboard bedrooms, there's a classic example there. We know we can fit that 3rd bedroom, not in the solarium, but in the unit. So I think we'll hear a little bit more about that too. So let's revise our planning rules and do it pragmatically. So our first speaker, I'll introduce Helen Liu, and we'll have our speakers come up one at a time. I'll introduce them and have their presentations. Helen is a development manager at Catalyst Community Development Society, which is a not-for-profit real estate developer. In her role at Catalyst, she partners with community organizations, nonprofits, and municipal governments to create projects that deliver on Catalyst's mission to unlock the value of community assets to create vibrant, affordable, and inspiring places for people to live and work in. She's worked in a variety of roles, from environmental governance to waste management to modular development, and now she's working as a sustainability consultant on a variety of mixed-use development projects across the Lower Mainland for Catalyst, and she's our first speaker. She'll be followed by John Stavell. Please welcome Helen.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Helen, and I work at Catalyst. As Michael mentioned, we're a not-for-profit developer. We develop and we own and we operate affordable rental housing. Our goal is to provide housing for individuals and families that earn between about $20,000 to $100,000 a year. And we do this by working with other community groups, such as nonprofits, churches, and municipal governments. So on almost all of our projects, land is our asset. It's kind of the only equity that we have in our project. So in many cases, it makes it really difficult to make our projects work financially. And because of this, often we have to build our projects a lot denser and thereby our homes a lot smaller. So I'd like to show an example of how we did this with one of our projects to kind of highlight our approach. This is our Madrona project at Dockside Green in Victoria. It was 49 rental homes that ranged from studios to 4 bedrooms, and included there is a table of the rents that we were able to charge at the time of occupancy, which was November 2017. We were able to make and keep the rents below market, and the rents are what pays off the financing of the project to build the project. So the green outline there kind of shows our site, and it was a really steep, really challenging site, very long and very narrow. To the bottom 1/3, you can kind of see we had to include this access to the Harbor Road down below, and it took up almost 1/3 of the site. Other things that we had to factor into our design was that Dockside Green was a LEED ND Platinum neighborhood, so there was costs and kind of design considerations there to meet the sustainability requirements. We had to meet there were parking requirements as usual, and then there were the minimum kind of unit size and bedroom requirements for the city of Victoria. So for this project, we were required to have 49 parking stalls. We couldn't build a parkade due to the site, and we couldn't go up because of the height restrictions, but we needed at least 49 units to make the financials and pro forma of the project work. So we requested a parking relaxation, and in the end, we provided a total of 6 parking stalls, and this was for the residents and for the visitors. So the reason we were able to do this is because Madrona was on a bike route. It's within 15-minute walk of downtown Victoria, and we also provided each of our residents a Moto membership and a year's worth of bus tickets. And then during our tenant selection process, we also actively found tenants that didn't own vehicles and ended up giving parking stalls only to families in the 3 or 4 bedrooms. This is the studio units. They were quite small. They are approximately 250 to 300 square feet. There was a lot of concerns about whether or not these units would work, whether they would be rentable or desirable. And I think that at the end of the project, they were almost fully rented out by the time that we got occupancy permit. And it was due to a variety of reasons. The design is quite efficient. In between the bedroom and the living area in that closet isn't a full height, so it was able to allow a lot of the daylighting into the bedroom while keeping it kind of a separated, more private space. And during the design, we did a lot of furniture layouts to make sure that it would actually fit a double bed, a dining table, and a couch. So this layout actually drives a lot of the design for a lot of the current projects that we have as well, where we're doing studio units that are about this size. These are our 3 and 4 bedroom townhomes. And in there we had a junior bedroom that was about 50 square feet that had a window. The rents that we were charging for these units was maximum of $1,500 for a 3 bedroom and maximum of $1,675 for a 4 bedroom. So for a lot of the tenants that we had in these units, what it meant was that a family could have siblings that could have their own private bedrooms, whereas if they had gone out to market and rented somewhere else, they would have had to share the space in a shared bedroom. And then lastly, with building small, I think that it's really important to consider the social aspect. And We know that when people live in denser and more urban environments, they tend to feel way more isolated. So at Madrona, we started our Community Connections program, and we do this by engaging with our tenants to make sure that there's a sense of community in the spaces that they live in. We do ongoing surveys with our tenants to understand what we can do to keep the spaces affordable and desirable. And for example, one of the things that we found out with Madrona was that we had to add way more bike storage than what was required for our minimums. So I think that the building design has traditionally relied a lot on really prescriptive requirements and guidelines and minimums. And Madrona is a really good example of one way you could build small but still affordable. I think the shift has to go from relying on requirements and kind of more on the intent and the outcomes. And this can be a lot more subjective, a lot more vague and messy, but I think if we ensure that the design and the intent meet the needs of the occupant, then it can be done beautifully. So I just want to leave you with a couple responses that we had in our most recent Madrona survey. I think it's a really good indicator, at least for me, that we're kind of doing the right approach in building small. And I know that it's an ongoing process, but it's an exciting one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. Next up, we have John Stavell, who's the president of Reliance Properties. John has been in the real estate investment and development industry for more than 25 years, working in all areas, including acquisitions, finance, civic approvals, construction, and marketing. And John's firm is, I think, noted within the industry for its work building small units and studios, micro suites, and being innovative. So I'd like to welcome John up onto the stage and deliver his perspectives on bending rules for compact affordability. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And as I like to say at Reliance, we've been thinking small for years, so it's a good way to go. So Reliance is a private development company, and we kind of, been very active in the urban context. We kind of stumbled onto microlofts a few years ago just by virtue of having bought an abandoned SRO at an auction, and we did our first microloft project in 2013, and we actually won an award for the most innovative company in BC by BC Business Magazine, and I don't say that so much to toot our own horn. It's just I think it's good that early in this discussion, one of our major publications recognized that we needed in housing innovation. And there's a lot of willingness in housing innovation, but there's a lot of barriers, which we're going to talk about a little bit. So we call them microlofts. They're just small homes, nothing new. We've seen studios and small housing for literally decades and over 100 years. They range in size from about 250 square feet for a studio, 400 square feet for a one, sometimes quasi two-bedroom, and 3 bedrooms at around 700 square feet. We did a project in Victoria in about 5-6 years ago when we brought units on the waterfront in downtown Victoria from $110,000, and rents in that world were around $350 to $550 per square foot for, say a 300 square foot suite. So why is this happening? It's trading space for. I think the real one is trading space for a place. We're basically saying we have these amenity-rich cities, and our stuff is smaller, and we can get away with less, and we can live a much better lifestyle in way less space, and that's what the population is saying, and that's what we're kind of up against. Just small as time in big cities. So the big risk factors to building microhousing are, developers are uncertain about market depth and design costs and higher construction costs due to higher unit density. Lenders are reticent due to limited resale data, and regulatory barriers around livability, complaints, and speculation. And I want to focus on those regulatory barriers. It's the big no. It's all housing innovation in our region, and particularly in the city of Vancouver, starts with no. So you have to kind of get from there. I always call it getting from no. So there's a long-standing bias against small housing among city planners. When we say small housing, what they see is 1860s tenement housing. They all go to the Tenement Museum in New York that I did, and they imagine that this is the squalor and despair that we're going to create when we build small housing. This is a as-is tenement in the New York City Tenement Museum. So there's your borrowed light bedroom right there, and that's the beginning of the trouble. And, you know, this is what they think, that we're going to put 17 people in one of these suites, and then during the day we're going to do needle trade. And this bias against this presumed unlivability of small housing runs deep in the spirit of planners. So we recently tested this out. Kent Spencer, late Kent Spencer, great Vancouver Sun reporter, wrote an article and interviewed us about microlofts, and he did manage to get hold of one of the senior planners at the city who literally said the concern around small housing was tenement-based concerns, and that this is what was the built-in resistance, and that when they finally got around to considering small housing and limiting and reducing their limitations and rules, that they would be thinking about tenement life. So some of the rules that we see: City of Vancouver, minimum you can build for rental is 320 square feet. City of Victoria, 355 square feet, except downtown where there's no minimum. City of Burnaby, 344 square feet. City of Surrey, where we've done microlofts, no minimum, but they're working on one. Because if they see you do something that they didn't expect, then they start working on a rule, right? That's what they do. Other regulations that limit small housing are no borrowed light or inboard bedrooms. Michael's referred to that. And the inboard bedrooms was a standard form of the tenement house, where the room for the family was at the back, and the living area had the bathtub and the kitchen and needle trade space during the day. And actually, borrowed light bedrooms concerns actually started with the transmission of tuberculosis and lack of ventilation in these suites, which of course is not a problem anymore. Horizontal angle of daylight is sort of a similar issue of you know, balcony overhangs, and that they require balconies, but if you put a balcony overhang, you don't bring enough light into the suite. Rent controls, you know, it's just another barrier to letting micro suites happen, because they want, when they get small, they want to start to rent control them instead of letting the market rule out. Let me just take you through the regulatory limitations, take you quickly through some of our examples. Again, the regulatory barriers. So trading space replaced. This was our converted Burns Block microloft in the corner of Hastings and Carroll in downtown East Side. Average size, 265 square feet. Currently renting at around $5 or $6 a square foot. Beautiful heritage building, restored heritage building. It worked because it was a triangular floor plate. This is our heritage building conversion and new addition microloft in Victoria. 300 square feet, average 11 parking stalls for 122 units, and we had 3 left when we were finished selling. $550 a square foot, sold in 2016. Beautiful heritage conversion. This building's won numerous awards. Right on the waterfront in downtown Victoria. Roof decks, common amenity spaces. This is a tower in Surrey that I'm finishing in about 3 weeks. It has 400 units. 300 of them are micro suites, ranging in size from high twos to up into larger units, and average about 350 square feet. We had 200 parking stalls for 400 units, and we're left with 100. Okay, so I'm going to speed up here. So we have about 800 microlofts under construction, and this is some of the common amenities and the way they look and the way they feel. And I'm just going to quickly end on a couple of plans here. So this is a micro studio. I think you've seen things like that before. This is our micro 2-bedroom unit. So when you look at it, it's basically got a sofa and a dining room area, and it's all open in one. But through a series of sliding door systems that you can see sort of retracted there, this becomes 1 bedroom, and that sofa turns into a bed. And this is another set of doors close, and that dining table becomes a bed. So now you have 2 bathrooms, or 2 bedrooms, both with access to the bathroom, and that's a 398 square foot 2-bedroom unit. This is our micro 3. So what you've got here is a dining area that's a bed in the upper right. You have a den area that's a bedroom on the lower left, and you have another transitional area that has a bathroom, has a powder room, and then in the large bathroom on the right, you have 2 bathrooms, but a shared shower, so there's a door on each side of the shower, and so we're tight for space, so we're able to have 3 bathrooms with 1 shower. And these units sold very well, and we were able to push beyond the studio and actually create modality square foot hours, as Michael was talking about, in larger suites as well. This one's about 720 square feet. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Next up, we have Anastasia Catalianos, who is a communication strategist and project manager, writer, editor with Small Housing BC. Since 2017, she's collaborated with Small Housing BC, a nonprofit in support of smaller housing in the province, and developed Canada's first Small Housing Summit. Anastasia loves design, partnership development, and finding new ways to connect the dots. She co-founded the BC Tiny House Collective and is currently co-producing a report on tiny homes for BC housing. So a completely different typology of housing, but welcome Anastasia up to the stage.
I've asked to step away from the computer, so. I guess I wanted to start it off with this slide because the actual, I guess, discussion today is sorry, these lights are blinding, is whether small is beautiful, and I don't know that I can really speak to that. I think that's quite subjective. What I do hope to discuss today, and by no means, again, am I a planner, a developer, or a designer, but really speak to some of the rules of engagement around small housing, which I think are really important to its uptake, but also its upsell in some ways. So I was invited to speak to this at this panel while I was away in Europe, so decided to take a lot of pictures and was really in the mindset of small is definitely not new, and it's quite apparent in Europe especially. My father, for instance, grew up with a family of 4 and 500 square feet. So this is the highest point that you can reach in Athens, and as you can see, Athens has a lot of ground-oriented housing. Much of it is small, so you do have in a lot of these builds studios as well as 1, 2, 3, 4 bedrooms. But I guess what my point is here is really small is diverse. And I know that while we focus quite often on tiny houses and micro suites, Small Housing BC, which I'll just pull its definition, sees these units as anywhere from 200 to 1,500 square feet. So we're not just looking at ground-oriented, low-rise apartments, but we're also looking at, and I'll show some of the units as we go further along, but row houses, cottage neighborhoods, micro suites, of course, suites and duplexes. So there's quite a variety when we're talking about small housing. But what I do love about the European example of small housing is that we really focus on the livability and that a balcony acts as additional space, similar to what John was even speaking about in terms of community amenities that often come in micro suite buildings. And I know that the City of Vancouver is exploring livability and size with the Making Room program. I don't know that they are necessarily correlated, but I'm interested to know what that definition actually is. In terms of small, so I spent some time in Europe, and then I did a quick trip in Toronto and Montreal, and then roamed the streets of Vancouver to get some shots. But my thesis, which is clearly, I guess, stated there, is that we've done small and we've done it well, and we've done it for centuries. So this is in Montreal, so the row houses, which now with our better practices, we can see that we can make this form even more innovative, especially because there's shared walls, so there's greater sustainability, and it really helps municipalities reach a lot of their targets that are within their official community plans. On the left is, this is in Roncesvalles in Toronto, so these are all well-established neighborhoods that really demonstrate the value of compact communities and really incorporating small not only in our living spaces but also in our working spaces. So here to the left, it's having, I believe this is in Strathcona, having restaurants on the bottom. In Montreal, I saw a lot of actual daycare centers. So you're really creating services or amenities for the community And I think that we also, while we keep talking about aging in place and intergenerational living and how laneway housing can really lend to that, I think we also have to think about the things that we put in our communities and consider that, seniors need to be able to walk to these, that we shouldn't just necessarily focus on major arterial roads as being where we kind of get our groceries and do things that we need for ourselves within our communities, but we actually have them within our communities. This, again, just demonstrating, bikes being incorporated, but also looking at small spaces as an add-on to the unit itself. So whether that's in the top right, looking at it being a shared space with tenants, in which you can actually have outdoor space. And this is just leveraging what we already have, which we have a lot of established communities within Vancouver so that we don't just continue doing sprawl. So my friend lives in the Outremont area in Montreal, and I found this quite interesting, and it kind of leads into my concluding kind of comments. And pas de colporteur, which was someone that back in the day used to sell religious texts door to door, basically, not wanting door-to-door salesmen, and I think that this is such an outdated sticker to be having on a door, saying that we no longer have these practices. And so in looking at our city planning and design and whether, and I hate to say it, but small doesn't always mean affordable, just because of labor and land prices and what have you. But we need to start looking at some of the barriers that are outdated and no longer relevant to what we are now building. So how do we necessarily do small here and now? I think we really need to start looking at the rules of engagement. And I'm now going to speak as kind of a small housing advocate, but also as a communications consultant. And really, I think that oftentimes when we do talk about small housing, there seems to be a misunderstanding that it's the solution and not necessarily part of a greater solution. So I know that at least at Small Housing BC and BC Tiny House Collective, that's not necessarily the mission, but to really incorporate it as part of a more integral community and way of living. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. These forms already exist in many iterations within the Vancouver and other cities, and I think that we need to just look at how it was done, how we can do it better, and really incorporate some of our building practices and industry knowledge into improving. In terms of prove it, I'm a huge advocate for research, and I think that if you really want to, and now I'm speaking, for nonprofits and people who are doing stuff in the small housing world beyond developers, that you really need to understand the needs of your city planners and other people that you're trying to perhaps encourage to change barriers. And reports are a great way of doing that, so long as they actually address the needs and the questions that are being probed or kind of those gap areas. So Center for Community Engaged Learning out of UBC connects community partners with undergrad and graduate students. So if you are looking for someone to do some kind of integral deep dive research, they're a great partner to reach out to. In terms of historical barriers, I know that John spoke to a few of them. I think that we do have this mentality of really focusing on the past and how small housing, played a role, whether that's with tenements or not. But we need to kind of do some reviews of some of our zoning practices to see what worked then, and we can kind of let go. Where are the door-to-door salesmen in our zoning that we need to get rid of? Expand market options, and I know this is something that Small Housing BC is looking at, but also, an example being looking at alternative foundations to concrete slab, which can reduce your cost by 10 to 25%, which is huge. This puts less reliance on the city to incentivize laneway housing or other options, but can really encourage the industry to step up. And I do think that the biggest thing is really the outreach component. And I don't want to say that municipalities have failed. I think it's very challenging to bring the public and industry into these conversations about how to create our future cities. That said, I don't think surveys are enough. And mind you, I've developed some of these practices, you know, when we did do some outreach with Maple Ridge and Nelson. I don't think poster boards with stickers are necessarily the way to go either. So I think that we need to have some more robust conversations and engagements around what small housing is and how we can incorporate it into our communities, but also understand, and I'm going to kind of pull and paraphrase from Denise Pinkston, who was integral for encouraging greater uptake of accessory dwelling units or laneway houses in the state of California. She did it through state legislation, and it's really, you know, you can't really tell property owners how to use their property. So how can we collectively understand that the opposition against small housing, whatever it may be, that we don't listen to the voices of few to dictate the future of many. And I could ramble on, but I got my 30 seconds like 30 seconds ago, so thanks.
Thanks, Anastasia. And our final speaker is Marianne Amadeo, who holds a master's degree in architecture. She's a registered architect. She started her own eponymous firm, Marianne Amadeo Architecture, in 2009, was joined by Harley Grisco in 2016 and renamed the firm MA and HG Architects. She's a member of the City of Vancouver's Regulatory Review Advisory Committee, and she sits on the board of the East Side Culture Crawl. Notably, Marianne serves also as the past chair of the City of Vancouver's Creative Advisory Panel for Housing Innovation and is a member of the city's panel on the Vancouver Mayor's Advisory Committee for Housing and Permitting and Process. So I think a very interesting last speaker in terms of wrapping up our discussion and maybe weaving in some of the regulatory reviews that the city's undertaking. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming and thanks for having me here today. I'm honored to be in such esteemed company. So our practice since 2009 has focused on housing alternatives that strive to address issues of affordability, sustainability, and environmental sustainability as well. Most of our projects, I think, right now would be identified as missing middle projects. And I want to talk about one of them specifically today called Tomo House. And the reason why we chose to talk about Tomo House today is because it's this, I think it's innovative in the way that we've rezoned it, but it's also kind of a gentler and softer form of density that I think we're going to start seeing more and more of in our single-family neighborhoods. But before that, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the ideas that form the basis for our practice, and the main one is this idea called social density. And I think I can talk again about how these issues of affordability have kind of brought us to where we are today, and it spawned on this sort of grand re-envisioning of our city and how we want to live and how we want to be together as a community. But I think that these ideas have caused this sort of political shift in our civic and our provincial governments, but it's also kind of caused this shift in sort of even how we all start to feel about what's important to us, how much space we really need, how we can develop community connections. And in our own work, we've kind of co-opted this this psychological term called social density, which is defined as the density in areas of the number of people, but more importantly to us, it's the number of interpersonal reactions that are likely to happen in a set space. And for me, the idea of beauty, I mean, we're architects, I can talk about what makes a building beautiful all day long, but really, it's really these interpersonal interactions and reactions that we feel is what creates beautiful space. So for us, the definition of social density also means foremostly this idea of densification or just densification. And for us, that's a minimum of 3 units per standard size lot. And frankly, I think I'm going to get rid of that because it's not. It's like 7. So I could just cross that off. The efficient use of our land and resources, that's like the elimination and reduction of setbacks. We really have to get over height, and we need to chill out on height. I don't know why we freak out so much about it. We need to design for people, not for cars, so the elimination and reduction of parking. And, but we need to think about livability, and I think my colleagues here have really talked about that a lot, and I can speak to it more specifically in how we employed these ideas of livability. You know, it's simple things like sharing common spaces, having higher ceiling heights, dual aspect units. And to me, these ideas equate to a beautiful architecture, one that's familiar, one that's based on ideas of composition, light and shadow, and as I said before, meeting and sharing. So, Michael, we tweened here. I'd like to show this slide because I think a lot about what we're doing is really exploring again that idea of the definition of family and what family means today. And I think our numbers are slightly different, but I think I have in 1962, the average house size was 983 square feet and about 4.5 people lived in it. And by like 2010, it was 2,300 square feet with less than 3 people living in it. So much about what we're talking about today is this return to the way things used to be. And I find it, probably as many of my colleagues do, immensely ironic that when we talk about character and we talk about retention and we talk about changing the character of a neighborhood, that in a lot of ways we're just trying to bring back exactly what we were doing before. Like trying to build a 4-story straight up apartment building in Vancouver is like a practical impossibility due to all the new zoning and ordinances and changes. So anyway, that was my rant. There'll probably be a few more. Sorry about that. While a building needs to look beautiful, and like I said, that is still really important, it's not enough. We just think that weaving these opportunities for sociability and sharing throughout a project is really what creates a beautiful feeling. And I think as an architect, at the end of the day, that's what I'm striving for. I'm trying to design a feeling. And so creating connections between households, that's at a macro, micro scale. We talk a lot with Charles Montgomery and others about appropriate cluster sizing, thoughtful moments of design at intersections, and creating maximum interaction where we can share amenities, outdoor spaces, we can share tools, we can share babysitters. Integrating with nature is huge. Just even having a small outdoor space to look upon makes your space feel so much bigger and so much more appealing. So those are all the things we think that make it beautiful. So here's Tomo. That's what's there right now. It's like this massive single-family house on this double-wide corner lot. This project was done as a rezoning under the Affordable Housing Choices Policy in Vancouver for co-housing. The rezoning was approved last July. We said we had to do a rezoning, and now we're doing a development permit, and we just did the development prior to, and then we're gonna have to do a building permit, and it's gonna take like 3 years of permitting, and that's insane. But anyway, regardless, we're there. It's a co-housing dwelling unit situated on a double-wide lot in South Vancouver. It was initially zoned for a single-family dwelling with an allowable FSR of 0.75. So that allowed for 5,000 square feet of a single-family dwelling, which I think is crazy. So this is what we're putting there instead. The rezoning allows for an FSR increase, which I think is so modest, to 1.62, or approximately 15,000 square feet. And this allows for 12 units of co-housing ranging from 400 square foot studios to 900 square foot 3-bedroom units. And like I was saying, Tess, this project is an example of a pure missing middle project. It's literally situated between Main Street to the east and a quiet single-family neighborhood to the west. There's a 4-story traditional apartment building to the south and a 2-story house, to the 4-story building is to the north, and the 2-story houses are to the south. And we're just trying to balance, and I think the developer in this case, Tomo, they're really sensitive, and they really wanted to balance and really create this kind of tweened typology, and we really wanted to strive for a new typology here that was somewhere between an apartment building and a single-family dwelling. And not for nothing, it does, I'll go back, it does, and it's supposed to, I don't know, maybe it's not supposed to, but not out loud, but in my head, it's a play on a Vancouver Special. So it's a new Vancouver Special as far as we're concerned. That's a secret. Don't tell anyone I said that. So, here we go. TOMO stands for Together More, and that's the ethos of this developer and of the projects that they want to continue to do. This is a first in a multitude of projects. The projects prioritize sociability, sustainability, and affordability. As I mentioned before, we worked with Happy City, and working with them, we were able to implement many principles of social density into the work. Co-housing is innately about sharing space, and because there was a co-housing group attached to this project, it made that part of the work that much easier because they already wanted it. They already understood that sharing communal spaces is what built their community. They have a mixed family size, from single people to large families living in there. And they understood that innately. And so much about it is also just about being a good neighbor. In this community, there are already associations being made between the older single residents and the children that they will be babysitting, for example. So how do we create this beautiful small space? So the first thing that we wanted to do was create what we call the sharing party. So the site, the party is an L-shaped party. It scribes itself around the whole building scribes itself around this exterior south-facing courtyard. So that means all the units are through units and all the units face this courtyard. So let's see, what else can I say? Yeah, so access to shared outdoor space is prioritized. It allows children a safe and enclosed place and for everyone to be surrounded by nature. So we also have this articulated private and public realms. So the architectural design also strives to reach out, to make connections outwardly to the surrounding neighborhood. So at number 1 there's a community interface at the Common House. And the Common House is really the heart of this project. It connects both at the public face and through to the courtyard space. And the front yard in front of it creates this kind of soft zone between the public and private realms. So we've got townhouse entries off of Ontario Place, which is a more residential street. So we're mimicking that kind of residential feel by having townhouses up the lane. And that facade is purposefully residential scaled. And there's just a lot of small moments. A lot of this project is made up of small moments, such as neighborhood stoops, Juliet balconies, these semi-private spaces that encourage residents to look over the street, to linger with each other, and just to meet. So this is a courtyard side. And again, you can see how it's scribed around that courtyard space. It's a south-facing courtyard, so it provides sunlit social space for all residents. The common house connection, you can see at that number 2 arrow, you can see that connection directly to the common house. It's a powerful enabler of daily, meaningful social encounters. We made it big enough so that everybody who lives there can dine there together, 28 seats. The parking, like everyone's mentioned, we did get a parking relaxation on this site. There is a car share space. The project simply wouldn't have been viable with underground parking. And a lot of what we did was around the walkways, generous walkways. They're wider, they're 5 feet wide, so just 2 feet wider, or like 18 inches wider than what's permitted by code, just so you can lock up a bike there, put a patio chair out there, you can lean up against a railing and talk to your neighbor. And so this is a floor plan showing the connection from the common house to the courtyard and to its public face at the street. And you can start to see a little bit about how we're laying out units, which I think we've seen a lot of brilliant plans about that tonight. That one, Unit 11, is a larger studio unit. But you can see how the through units are really a helpful device, and we try and do this more and more because it makes that studio unit really into a 1-bedroom quite simply. So we're thinking a bit differently about some of the washroom layouts and the bedroom layouts. And there's our 3-bedroom, 870 square foot unit. It exists on a corner. And we're also thinking about affordability within the construct of the user group. That's a 1-bedroom in the corner there plus a lock-off. So we're enhancing affordability by allowing that 1-bedroom to possibly rent out that little lock-off suite there as well. So again, I feel like a lot of what we're doing here is a return to the way things used to be, and we hope that this project will become an example of how we can reintegrate, I would say, this typology into our existing neighborhoods where they weren't before. And I think one of the things that really struck me about what Jake was saying at the beginning is about this idea of permanence and growth and adaptability in our building. And you know, as we kind of systemically tear down a city and build it back up again, I'm hopeful that these ideas of sociability and sharing will become more important, and more important than size is the quality of what we're trying to do here. So this is a quote that we kind of live by. It was by Grace Murray Hopper. She was amazing, and she said the most dangerous phrase in the language is, "We have always done it this way." Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Marianne. Thank you. That sort of wraps up the presentation for our evening, and it opens up the floor for questions and some questions to the panel. Maybe a question for all of you. What do you think the next greatest opportunity is in terms of small housing forms, and where?
I don't think it's a typology. I don't think it's a typology because we've seen from everyone here tonight that the typologies are already worked out, and there's so much innovation, so much energy behind these ideas that the next big opportunity is getting rid of the obstacles. Mm-hmm. And it's so entrenched and it's just so over. I think that there's going to be a breakthrough where you know, the planning professions finally, you know, ease up a little bit and let people innovate.
Yeah, I think Anastasia pointed out that right now we're putting all of our density on, I'm feeling a bit frank tonight, so I'll just be frank, on dirty transit corridors where access to our most beautiful spaces is sort of denied. And for me, the biggest opportunity is in whatever that is, 70% of our land mass that's zoned single family. I'll just say one more thing. Like, I think I ask this question to people all the time, and maybe I'll ask, I don't know, maybe you guys can all think about it and tell me later, or a show of hands. Okay, I'm gonna ask you guys, would you rather have 12 30-story towers at every corner, or, I know, I'm sorry, maybe not rather have, in addition to, or like 65 four-story buildings scattered throughout Vancouver. So, who said option A?
Show of hands. Option B? Lots of people.
Because I think, innately, we do towers too. And I think that they work and they can work. I'm not trying to, I think we need all typologies, but I think that for most people that I hear from, being able to translate the ideas that are coming through in some of these towers into a smaller scale is really more desirable, closer to schools, closer to the parks and beaches.
Interesting. Opportunities?
I kind of want to stand up for municipalities just a little bit on this end, because I do see that when we work with the groups that we do and the municipalities that we do, I think they're starting to look at options, and that's why some of the projects that we do work is because we sit down with our planners and our architect and we go, we'd really like to do this, we can't make it work, but if we look at this option or get a little bit creative, then we can kind of move forward outside of these regulations. But I do think that there's resistance there because it's easy to just look at a regulation and go, yes, no, I'm checking off a box and it's being done or not done. So I think the intent in the future is that people understand it needs to go that way, but just a matter of how we're going to do that.
I just want to add to the A and B options. I think there should be a C option. I think that oftentimes we're putting small housing against, towers or whatever, and I think to each their own. So I would say there should be C, where, I'm a ground-oriented gal. I live in a 3-story walk-up, so I'm into that. But I know people that love 28-floor views, which make me ill because I'm scared of heights. But in terms of innovation, I think we just have to look to industry and designers. They already know what to do. I think we just need to start listening and actually acting on it. And I know that there's a few builders in the room, Small Works, Lane Fab, Passive, Lead. We can do so much more. I think we just need to push the envelope and have courageous leadership. And I think it's important that councillors go on small housing tours and get a real sense of what is available and what the needs are and how to really do more. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And just to clarify, I use that anecdote in relation to how our landmass is zoned and the restrictions placed on our RS1 zones. Of course, every typology should be open for everybody to use. And I think that's one of the issues that we've had is a restriction and on certain typologies in certain zones.
I think there's an interesting interplay in terms of the learning on what makes smaller units livable and the kind of creativity works well in towers. I hear a lot of people with a bias against higher density towers. They're unlivable, they're unsociable. And the frank reality is that when I lived in that tower on Alberta Street, I was in the New York Times, Christmas edition of the Times, where families moving downtown. That was one of the most social places I lived. I knew more of my neighbors than I do now. I live on 33rd in Blenheim. I know one neighbor on one side, one neighbor on the other side. But the common areas, the co-location of so many people living in compact units with entries that everyone has to go through. I call it the calamari. It's the oasis, the social oasis. And that you can do small compact designs that have amenities co-located in really key areas that mix people, makes everything livable. What are the biggest barriers for you right now? You're working on some projects, John. Where's the biggest push point?
Well, I mean, the outright minimum unit sizes are problematic in strata in Vancouver, where we have the biggest issues with affordability and the highest density. It's sort of more our world. Minimum 398 square feet. Rental minimum 320 square feet. I understand from speaking to some people that the 398 might be the minimum size at which the city can charge DCLs. So there's probably your answer there. But just that barrier, that's an artificial barrier when we can prove livability, and to the isolation point, when you create the units and they go down to a certain size, and in our micro-suite buildings, we always create lots of amenities and redundant amenities, bookable dining rooms, bookable social spaces with outdoor connections. It actually, to a degree, drives people out of the unit at certain times. It's like a hotel. You check in your hotel, you kind of get cleaned up, and you're like, okay, let's go out, right? And you go out into the common amenity areas, and you go out into the city. We call it a 300 square foot unit with a 3 million square foot living room. The city is your living place. And it's just, why do we have all these rules? Like, you know, why are we standing in the way of innovation when clearly people want these things? So it really is the rules that are standing in the way. Every time you get a good idea about housing in our region, and probably anywhere in the world, the first thing you're going to run into is a rule.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that statement. I think, you know, I think that the way that FSR is calculated, you know, how we don't attribute amenity space to unit size, like that's an idea that we've been working with on a project that we did with Rise Lab, which is a higher density investigation where we took out all of the kind of extraneous space in a unit, put it into amenity space, but still calculated unit size based on a percentage of that amenity space. So, you know, is your unit, you know, we did another project called APT years ago where the units are 150 square feet, but there's 15,000 square foot of amenity space. So we always said that your house is actually 15,150 square feet, but your bedroom is 150 square feet. So I think a lot of the ways that FSR to me is a bit of it's a game. It's really, a lot of it is for optics, for how it looks. So being able to calculate that about, like for example, on Tomo, we asked for a FSR exclusion on that small space I described outside of the corridor that was for amenity. We wanted to put that to our balcony exclusion, and they wouldn't allow that. And I think a lot of those things are really frustrating because the words still don't fit the picture. I know that you know, working with a lot of City of Vancouver people, I know that they're working towards that, and I think democracy is a bit slow. I think that we do have to account for everybody's voice and ask everyone's opinion on these matters, but like John, I feel like we're getting to the breaking point on it, that I hope that people who believe in small building will start speaking out in the venues that we have, and I think we're seeing more and more of that. For the longest time, you know, we only heard from the people who were a bit preservationist and wanted things to stay the same. But the more that we meet like this, and the more that we talk to our city councillors, and the more that we go out in support of rezonings or projects that we see that support densification, the closer we're going to get.
I think on a lot of our projects, the comments that we get back from the regulation process is they don't jive together. If we look at the big picture, we get bits and pieces of it at different steps, and then some of it kind of conflict with other things that we're getting later on. So, for example, on a project that we're doing in Port Moody, you know, it's, first you have to have outdoor patio space for all of our units, and then later on, a couple months later, it's, you have to push it all back because the frontage of the building has to, you know, not protrude out with all these balconies. So then you're trying to fit really small units, but then you've got really weird layouts because you're forcing these the walls to kind of jig-jag to meet these requirements, and it's hard to to then go back and say, hey, it's really hard to achieve this. I understand what the intent is here, but it's hard to achieve this when you're kind of got all these different bits and pieces of comments that are coming through at different stages without looking at the big picture of the overall process.
Yes, a simple building aspect.
Yeah.
Interesting. I thought it'd be interesting to open it up to the audience and see if you get any feedback from the audience and things that you want to know.
Have you found a standard way to deal with the relaxation of parking? Is there, parking study?
I'm going to go way outside my comfort zone and compliment the City of Vancouver. Yeah. They recently eliminated parking requirements for residential and commercial use in the downtown core. This is going to end up being one of the most critical breakthroughs in unlocking a lot of infill sites on land mass, and it also means that you can work better with small units because you're not getting this unit count driven parking requirement. This is a hugely good thing that they did, and what I'd like to see is have that propagated through the Broadway corridor and other areas. It does create issues with surrounding streets, and you have to have more parking controls, but they're on a really good pathway there with parking.
Yeah, I would agree. Most of our projects that we have on the boards required a parking relaxation, and we try to sorry, I'm losing my words here, but we try to mitigate that by allowing for more bicycle parking. And car share, I think, is huge. I think it's something that the city is supporting, and we've never been denied a parking relaxation as of yet for buildings sociable and for any of our developments that show how we're mitigating it. So parking is one of the easier ones I'm finding lately to get over.
To unlock and unbundle,
Yeah.
it's a massive savings in terms of if you're talking about affordability and trying to build compact units to hit an affordability target. One parking stall consumes 400 to 450 square feet of space. For the concrete and all the foundations, I mean, it's probably, I would guess, about $40,000 to $50,000 a stall. So, I think I'm looking at a future world. I didn't buy my last car, I leased it. Gasoline car, they're done. I think the car is done. We're seeing more and more alternative types of transportation. It's a massive thing. So developers are also taking risks by building buildings without cars for sale, for rent. I think you're seeing it. To answer your question.
Michael, we have a question over here.
I think John and others have said that the regulatory barriers are right on the mark, and I just want to also not come to the defense necessarily of the City of Vancouver, but acknowledge that as a registered professional planner, I am one of them. I don't know if anyone here is from the City of Vancouver Planning Department, but I think it's important also to drill down a little bit on some of those barriers and notice that it's not necessarily the city, the municipal government, that has created them. For example, why can't we do fee simple row housing, townhouses with party walls like they do in the rest of the world? Well, I've never really heard a fully satisfactory answer to that question. It has something to do with fire codes, it has something to do with the insurance industry, it has something to do with the lenders, the banking industry, it has something to do with the provincial government. I'm not sure, maybe John or somebody else can explain it to me. And that seems to me an obvious one where the barriers lie beyond a local government. And another example would be, why can't we subdivide 33-foot lots down to 16-foot lots or whatever, or 50-foot lots like down to 25 feet, like we used to do in Vancouver back in the 70s and the early 80s. There are some narrow houses, and they're very livable. My ex-wife and my son live in one of those, and they're actually quite fabulous. And yet, when you try and do that now in the city, you can no longer do it, and there's some other legal barrier to that as well. So I'm just wondering if people can comment about that, because whilst we're talking about micro suites and tiny units of 400 and 300 square feet, that doesn't work for everybody, as we discussed and concurred. There's a spectrum of housing sizes, and so I think there are other more modest moves that could be made, and I'd be interested to hear from folks on the panel about some of those barriers that are beyond the city's control.
Great question. Any ideas?
You're probably doing that.
Go ahead.
Well, I totally agree with you that like these small suites are just one thread, one rail of small housing, and ground-oriented small housing is in many ways just as important or more important than what I'm talking about, because of the amount of area we have dedicated to single-family zoning. Laneway housing is a huge breakthrough. Small lots, from what I understand, and I lived on my last house before I moved to an apartment, was on a 25-foot lot, and it was a beautiful home. It was incredibly well designed. And I think it's still a municipal thing, minimum lot frontage. I think it's still a municipal thing. I thought the fee simple row housing thing got dealt with. Do you know that, Michael? I thought a few years ago that actually did get dealt with, and you can. Yeah. But that's a land title thing, I think. So yeah, to your point, it's well taken that there are provincial barriers. But if I had to add it up, I'd find the vast majority of barriers we're finding to housing innovation are in the municipal framework.
And you're right. I think that the city of Vancouver, there's a lot of excellent forward-thinking housing policy and urban planners there that do not disagree with anything or any of the ideas that we're saying. I think that, I think I've said it a couple of times, we live in a democracy, and that democracy is slow. So I think that having consultation has become more and more important. Having community involvement has become more and more important, and ensuring that people's voices are heard. And I think that process takes time. So again, I feel like the more voices that talk about things like this and are heard, then the quicker we get to these resolutions, because that's, when you phone up, when you have a counselor or you have a planner who's getting phone calls from the same people over and over again opposing a development because of its density, then those are the people who are going to be heard, and therefore they're the ones who are going to influence the policy. So I do think it's political, and I think that we all have the power to be more active in that regard to help our planners achieve these innovations. Having said that, though, I think design, I don't know, maybe I'm an extremist, but I don't believe in design guidelines. I think that they should just go away. I think, in fact, they hamper innovation. At least I think that one of the things that we saw in the new RS district schedule was a caveat that talked about how the director of planning can relax anything. And I think Jake, where's Jake? We should feel pretty proud of that one, because I think that was us. And because we talked a lot about how we just needed a way out. Like, if I've got a better idea than what you've written on this piece of paper, you have to let me show it to you. And you have to be able to put your eyes on it. So I think small steps like that are coming. It doesn't mean that it's going to be any easier to get it through, but I feel like we have to find a path to innovation, and we have to embrace it.
I just wanted to add and to echo off of what Marianne is saying, that I have seen a lot of municipalities that have taken steps to innovate. I guess there's just, you always want a little bit more. City of Nelson has waived a lot of their design guidelines around their laneway development in order to, encourage performance-based criteria, which we've seen a lot in the States and has worked really well. I know that Small Housing BC is wanting to take that a step further and look at that from a provincial lens. I guess challenges, though, if I could kind of loop back to that, because I do think that it still remains the communities really need to understand the need for diversity, even though we're not Europe and we're not as dense, and that single family zones just happen to be the place in which we can do that and really create dynamic communities that are already intact and connected, instead of constantly building out and kind of beyond. And I do think that there is a bit of an onus, yes, on the city to do that, but there's also that deep need for partnerships, so nonprofits to come forward, housing advocates, industry, yourselves included, ourselves too. I do know that when I did go to the lock-off suite, when that was passed with the duplexes with the City of Vancouver, I saw a lot of gray hair in that room. And I do think we need to start thinking about how do we bring younger voices and how do we meet people where they're at. So if we have young families that are in these communities that are equally affected, and individuals and couples, because I think we always speak about families, and families are not just, you know, parents and children and what have you, but how do we get them involved, and whether we have to go on the soccer field or go to the ice rink to get really other voices included in that process. I think that's important.
I think it's interesting to know too, to your point, Rand, about where do we begin to add more density, more compact units, and relax. Just relax a little with the height, relax a little with the guidelines, or interpreting guidelines as policy. That's one of the other obstacles is that sometimes you get people who look at the guidelines and say, no, that's actually a rule. No, it's a guideline. But ironically, a lot of the inboard neighborhoods, you know, to your question about where do you want to live. I mean, I've lived as a student in Vancouver for a long time, and you know, moving from place to place, and I know for sure I'd rather live 1 or 2 blocks off in Ontario any time of the day. You know, I live at 13th and Fur, you know, beautiful, inboard, leafy. And today, actually, I was walking by in the South Granville neighborhood looking at high-density towers inboard in very leafy, luxurious, some of the most desirable neighborhoods in Vancouver. And in a lot of those places, if you think about not just Vancouver, but regional-wide, you know, those are places where you can do infill at higher density with more compact units without displacing a lot of people. Fewer people than if you were reworking older rental neighborhoods.
Michael, we have a question here.
Right?
Not a question, just a comment about potential. I think one of the greatest potentials that I see in single-family neighborhoods is the front yard. Somehow this front yard has become sacred, and I think we need to think about that again.
Small Housing BC did a project with the city of Maple Ridge, and we started exploring whether they could bring tiny houses as an alternative to an ADU, and they don't have laneway access like in the city of Vancouver, so they were exploring how this could actually be placed on large frontages. So there definitely is opportunity, and I know that, you know, and kind of maybe to get back to what that gentleman said earlier, you know, not all rules and restrictions come from the municipality. A lot of things in terms of tiny houses just fall on the BC building code. And unfortunately, and not unfortunately at the same time, because there is some safety concerns, and you know, these rules were there for a reason. So I do think it's important to look at the historical kind of reasoning for why they were there and whether they are relevant today. But just to loop back, if you look at float homes though, and their build code, they have steep staircases and they do a lot of things that BC build code doesn't allow. So we just need to start looking at precedents and really using this housing crisis to expand housing opportunities, but also options for those who want to seek smaller.
A question over here.
A question with regard to the windowless or bedrooms. I can't remember what you call it. You got a better phrase than that.
Inboard.
Inboard, thank you. What are the barriers to it today? Is it buyers? Is it lenders? Is it the regulators? And where do you see that going? Any of the panelists?
I'll just cover that. In Vancouver, you're simply not allowed to do an inboard bedroom, so that it's not a lender thing at all. I think West Group did a study, it was in a newspaper a few years ago, where they looked at a 2-bedroom unit that had an inboard bedroom and a 2-bedroom unit that had to have the outboard bed. You know, both bedrooms had to have an outside wall, and they managed to make it, I think, 150 or 200 square feet smaller, and therefore more cost-effective, and arguably even better for a young child with mechanical ventilation, and it's going to be quieter. You're not going to get the nightclub thing happening, you know, at the end of the night. So it's straight up a regulatory barrier in Vancouver anyway, and in Surrey and in Victoria and other places we've done microloft, it's just not a rule. And so we just do it automatically. No one says anything. But in Vancouver, it's a problem.
This was the West Group study.
So it was 265 square feet smaller.
Yeah, 265 square feet smaller at
$800 a foot.
$800 a square foot. well over $160,000, $170,000.
Yeah. And it was that TV thing, like it actually was TV, like it's.
Yeah, I think that it's a zoning, like you're required to have, every bedroom needs to have a window in it. We can't, I think everybody probably tries to adapt to some of the bylaws that the city puts out, but you can't even call you can't have a den anymore, right? You can't have an inboard den anymore, so you have to label it like pantry or storage or whatever, right? Like it's just, I think they're aware of that. I know I spoke at CONFAB, the AIBC conference a few weeks ago with Edna Cho, who's amazing senior housing policy planner at the City of Vancouver, and she showed a slide that talked specifically about inboard bedrooms and that the city is undergoing a study on it. And when they went out to the public, that it was split right down the middle. That publicly, there were people who loved the idea of it, and the other half completely opposed. I don't buy one. I agree. It's like, I don't know why we're putting that question to people who don't want it. Like, I feel like a lot of our consultation process in the city of Vancouver specifically is flawed, because you're asking people to criticize something that is not really relative or relevant to them as well. It's hard for people, I think, to look outside of their own lens. So they're only going to be looking at how something affects them. They aren't going to be looking at how it affects people at large or the community at large, or maybe someone who wants to move into their neighborhood. So I think that there's problems there, but I'm not sure if what the other way is, from a political standpoint.
Any comments on inboards? I just have one. I think it's interesting because a lot of municipalities are now requiring a certain minimum number or percentage of 2 plus beds, 3 plus beds. And this is one excellent way, and you can do it in a manner that's affordable to most households, or to more households. That you, like John said, that this is easily 20% less space, and you can functionally get the performance of a third bedroom. I've heard people say, look, I'm sleeping, why do I have access to a window? You can get other forms of ventilation and borrow light.
Good time for maybe one more question right here.
Excellent.
Thanks, everybody. Marianne, Andrew over here.
Oh, hi, Andrew.
Keep ranting, especially during meetings.
Thanks.
We supposedly have a city plan coming up. Broadway Corridor, more or less, is coming. I know this is like the choir. So I go to enough open houses for projects of my own, or just out of curiosity to see how kind of the public input plays out. If you ever followed the moderate income rental housing open houses, especially in Kitsilano, that might be a debate of how the city plan might go. So how do you tell the not choir folks to convince them of these elements, like reduced parking, especially, which reduces, say, a 6-story building to a 5-story building, or it reduces commercial on an arterial street to non-commercial because they think it'll bring extra traffic, parking issues. So how do you have these conversations with the general public, whether it's the people that have the loudest voices or the people that you're trying to go to the hockey rinks for, like I heard in West is doing a really good job. How do you talk to those people and rope in the whole conversation of what it brings as benefits to a city and to them as maybe their kids, even, not just them as like an older person, but to like a 5-year-old child of theirs, like the benefits that they'll have one day?
I know for our projects, we have to do that a lot, because when we go to public hearing, you often do get a lot of people that are there all the time, the gray-haired people. For most of these projects, it's just effort on our part, going out, finding tenants, finding people that can speak to that experience genuinely. And I think that when you try and engage that way, then they kind of see the benefit and the impact of them being there and speaking out as an example. And I think that a lot of the people that we've brought so far to some of our projects, hopefully in our public hearing, are willing to come back and kind of provide support in the future because they're aware that that voice needs to be there in some of this engagement. I think there's also a lot of different organizations out there that, I can't remember the one, but that do connect younger, abundant housing, that do connect people that are kind of younger and in that group that want to come out and speak at these sort of opportunities. So I think I see that it is happening, but there needs to be more encouragement of that, definitely.
Sorry. I think you have to listen, and I think you have to acknowledge that that's a concern. We did some Small Housing BC, we did some engagement with a particular municipality, and this particular fellow was very enraged about the fact that he said that there was a covenant on his neighborhood that it wasn't meant to change, and he had lived there for 35 years, and it was no longer about small housing or Small Housing BC or any of that. You simply just had to be an ear, because you do at a certain point have to put NIMBYism aside and really understand what is for the greater good of the entire community. What does your OCP say? Is your OCP boasting innovative language and you're not taking any of those actions? Because if you are, as a writer, I'm insulted and you should not use that language. I think we just have to start doing, kind of moving forward, but also acknowledging that these are genuine concerns at times. We did have one gentleman who was a home builder. So there's a huge trend now. Most people who are building laneways are the people that are actually property owners, and so they're not very familiar with city planning processes, nor are they familiar with the homeowner builder processes out of BC Housing. So here this man was very aggravated, and yet he gave us like vital information on how we had to improve the process going forward. So I think listening and sometimes not speaking is the best way.
Yeah, Andrew, you're specifically talking about the Broadway corridor. We went through an extremely robust and lengthy neighborhood consultation process for the Hollywood Theatre. And, we got 6 there for in exchange for the retention of the Heritage building. And that 6 was pretty topped out. Like, I feel like we could have got more. I feel like it was worth more. I feel like that street could go higher. 6 seems a bit low. And, I'm happy to engage with people and hear their concerns, get their feedback, try to make them understand what it is that we're trying to achieve and who we're trying to achieve it for and the public benefit. But at the end of the day, I'm kind of getting tired. Like, I sort of feel like it's not my job to do that. And that's why, I'll say it once again, that it's politically motivated. So the more voices that come out and talk to our councillors, show up at John's open houses in support and show up at Catalyst open houses in support and write letters of support, the more those voices are going to be heard. And that's what our elected officials are obliged to respond to, is the major democratic voice. So I don't think that our process has necessarily been, although it's intended to be democratic, has necessarily been democratic so far, because a lot of the people whose voices aren't being heard are like at work on Wednesday afternoon, or picking up their kids from daycare on Wednesday afternoon, when perhaps the retired person can spend their time in council chambers and speak up. So, I really want our planners to do this and our mayor to do it and our councillors to do it. I would rather not have to tell somebody that, their kind of time has come. Like, they won the generational lottery, congratulations, but now it's time for someone else to have a chance to live in that neighborhood too.
Thank you for your guidance. I think when we're talking about small housing and compact forms of housing, we are talking about more people, more density in neighborhoods, and that is politically challenging. And to your point, I think it's the role of planners as well too. It's a tradition of planners since Jane Jacobs, to be advocates for the voices that aren't in the room, to radically advocate for people whose voices aren't being heard. So I think there is a role for planners. There's definitely a role for all of you if you're interested in creating more sustainable neighborhoods that are compact, that are more affordable, that are more convivial and social, while still maintaining, I think, what everybody in Vancouver and its region loves about their neighborhoods: the leafy quality, the leafy character, the connection to the outdoors, good architecture. I think all these things are achievable. It's counterintuitive that you can have greater numbers of people living in the same block, but have a neighborhood that's inherently more livable and more enriched by that. So, I don't know if we have any more questions? Go ahead.
Well, I think we're over time, so we should probably let these lovely people go home.
Excellent. Okay, well, I wanted to thank the panel, really give a round of applause to everybody. Continue the conversation on Urbanarium's website, and I wanted to thank our sponsors, Urbanarium and Small Housing BC, and thank you all.